The snow hadn't started yet, but New York was already glowing like it wanted to perform a miracle. On Mulberry Street, a warm Italian restaurant overflowed with laughter, clinking glasses, and the smell of roasted garlic. Inside, people toasted to love and fortune. Outside, a little girl in a torn red coat pressed her palms against the glass, her breath fogging the window. "Mom," she whispered, eyes fixed on the plates of pasta spinning by. "Do you think hunger ever ends?" If that question stopped you for a second, imagine hearing it in person. Because someone did. A billionaire who thought he had everything except a reason to feel alive stood just a few feet away when those words split the night. What he did next would change 3 lives forever. Stay with me, because what began as one child's question became a miracle New York still remembers. Lucas Hale was the kind of man magazines loved. 34, handsome in a sharp, distant way, founder of a finance firm that seemed to print money. His smile was practiced, his calendar full, his apartment silent. On Christmas Eve, he walked the same route he always did, Mulberry to Spring, heading toward the same restaurant where he always dined alone. He'd convinced himself he liked solitude, that it was the price of success, but something inside him had been cracking quietly for a long time, and tonight it finally split open. The girl couldn't have been more than 6. Her hat was too thin for December. Her shoes were soaked through. Next to her stood a young woman, maybe mid-20s, with the kind of tired beauty that even hardship couldn't hide. She held a canvas bag that had seen better years, and a dignity that refused to beg. When the girl Lily asked her question, the woman's shoulders tensed. "It will, sweetheart," she said softly, forcing a smile. "One day it will." Lucas froze. He didn't mean to stare, but something about that small voice pierced through the noise of the street. People brushed past, busy with shopping bags and laughter, but to him the city seemed to go quiet. "Do you think hunger ever ends?" The words echoed in his mind over the rhythm of his own footsteps, over the ghosts of every lonely dinner he'd ever eaten. Lily turned her face toward the restaurant window again, the lights reflecting in her wide brown eyes. Inside, a family clinked glasses. A boy about her age slurped spaghetti, grinning at his father. She smiled at the sight, not with envy, but with wonder. That pure, innocent curiosity. How could she still believe in goodness when the world had given her so little? Her mother, Grace, noticed Lucas staring and pulled Lily closer. "Sorry," she said, embarrassed. "She talks to everyone. She's curious." Lucas hesitated. Then, without thinking, he said, "I like curious." Grace's eyes narrowed, cautious. "We're fine, thank you." But Lily tilted her head. "You're eating alone." Lucas smiled, caught. "I was planning to. Why?" That simple word unraveled something inside him. "Maybe I got used to it," he said quietly. "Maybe that's the problem." Grace tried to pull Lily away again, but Lily tugged back. "Can we eat here, Mommy? Just once." Grace shook her head. "We can't afford," Lucas interrupted softly. "You'd be doing me a favor. I hate eating alone on Christmas Eve." Grace hesitated. Pride wrestled with need. It was a silent, invisible fight, and Lucas could see every round of it play out in her eyes. He didn't pity her, he respected her. The way she tried to keep her daughter's innocence intact even as the world bruised them. Finally, she nodded once. "Okay, but only because she'll never forget this night." Inside, warmth wrapped around them like a hug. The waiter looked surprised when Lucas asked for a table for 3. Families chatted nearby, unaware that a miracle was quietly taking shape between courses. Lily ran her fingers along the tablecloth, fascinated. "It's so soft," she whispered. When the bread arrived, she gasped. "Is this real garlic bread?" Like in the movies, Lucas grinned. The realist. As she took her first bite, she closed her eyes, savoring it as if it were a dream she didn't want to end. Grace tried to hide how long it had been since their last proper meal, eating slowly, politely, as if gratitude needed permission. "You know," Lily said between bites, "people inside eat every day. We don't. But maybe one day everyone will." Grace's hand froze halfway to her plate. Lucas looked at the child across the table and thought, "This little girl believes in something I stopped believing in a long time ago." The waiter returned with extra bread and a knowing smile. Outside, the first snow began to fall, dusting the street in silver. Lucas glanced out the window, watching the flakes melt on the glass, and felt something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. Later that night, when they said goodbye on the corner, Lily looked up at him and asked, "Will we see you again?" He wanted to say yes, but old habits die hard. "Maybe," he said. Lily smiled the kind of smile that could melt winter. Maybe is almost a yes. She turned away, skipping in the snow, her mother following quietly behind. Lucas stood there long after they disappeared, staring at the spot where they had been. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and whispered into the cold night, "Let's make this city eat." He didn't know it yet, but the miracle had already begun. Inside the restaurant, the warmth wrapped around them like a living thing. The air smelled of basil garlic and something else, something rarer: belonging. Lucas hadn't noticed before how laughter sounded when it had a home to echo from. Now he did. Across the table, Grace and Lily were framed by soft candlelight, their faces illuminated as if the universe had chosen that moment to remind him what humanity looked like. Lily sat upright, her hands folded on her lap, mimicking the manners she'd seen other children use but never had the chance to practice. When the waiter placed a basket of warm bread in front of her, she glanced at her mother for permission. Grace gave a tiny nod. The child's delight was pure, almost holy. She broke off a piece, steam rising in the air, and smiled as if it were her birthday. Antonio, the waiter, had seen all kinds of customers, from Wall Street executives to Broadway actors, but this table drew his quiet attention. He recognized the look in the mother's eyes, the balance between gratitude and fear of pity. Without a word, he placed 3 glasses of water, then a small bowl of butter, and whispered, "For the young lady," before disappearing. Lucas tried not to stare, but every movement from Grace carried a quiet dignity. The way she straightened her back before speaking, the way her hand brushed her daughter's hair, as if reminding herself that tenderness was still allowed. "You must come here often," she said, finally, her voice careful but polite. "Every Thursday," Lucas admitted. "It's my way of pretending I have a life." Grace smiled faintly. "And does it work?" He hesitated. "Not really." They both laughed softly. It wasn't flirtation, it was recognition. The laugh of 2 people who had been walking alone too long. Dinner arrived in slow, perfect waves. Rigatoni with tomato sauce, a plate of risotto that smelled like comfort, and a salad bright with olive oil. Lily looked at the food as though it might vanish if she blinked too long. She leaned close to whisper, "Is this what rich people eat every day?" Sometimes Lucas said, his tone gentle, "But I think it tastes better when you earn it." Grace's eyes flicked up. "Then this must taste incredible for her," she said softly. Lucas caught the shadow that passed over her face. Pride, embarrassment, maybe guilt for accepting kindness. It made him ache. He knew money could solve 100 things, but never that one. Lily twirled her spaghetti, carefully concentrating as though the success of the world depended on it. A single strand slipped off the fork and landed on the tablecloth. She gasped. "I ruined it." Grace reached over quickly. "No, sweetheart, you're fine." Lucas smiled. "You can't ruin Christmas dinner, Lily. It's against the law." She giggled, and just like that the tension dissolved. As they ate, conversation began to flow first, in hesitant trickles, then freely. Lily told him about her favorite colors blue because it feels like calm and yellow because it forgives. She talked about the stray cat near their building, the one she named Snowball, even though it was gray. Lucas listened, fascinated. No one had told him stories like this in years, simple, messy, real. Grace, still guarded, answered his questions carefully. She'd worked as a barista until the coffee shop shut down. Rent had climbed and she'd fallen behind. When Lily got sick that fall, she'd chosen medicine over the power bill. One choice, 1 week, and the spiral began. "You think you're safe until the floor cracks," she said quietly. "Then you realize you were standing on thin ice the whole time." Lucas looked down not at his food, but at his hands. "I grew up in foster care," he said after a moment. It surprised even him. "I know that sound the ice makes right before it breaks." Grace studied him. I just hit it better," he said. For a moment, neither spoke. It wasn't pity that connected them, it was truth. Antonio returned with dessert tiramisu layered high like a soft mountain of sugar and cocoa. "Compliments of the house," he said with a wink. Grace began to protest, but Antonio cut her off. "Christmas rule. No one argues with free dessert." Lily took a spoonful and closed her eyes. "This tastes like happiness," she announced. Lucas watched her, the innocence in her tone hitting him with quiet force. He envied how easily children believed joy could be that simple. Grace reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand, whispering something too low for him to hear. He caught only one word: tomorrow. When the plates were cleared, the three of them lingered. Around them, other diners drifted out into the cold, leaving behind the faint sound of jazz and clinking dishes. Grace pulled her coat tighter. Lucas wanted to say something about how strange it was that three strangers could feel like a family for one meal, but he couldn't find the right words. As they stepped outside, snow finally began to fall. The city glowed under 1,000 tiny lights. Lily reached out, catching flakes in her palms. "They melt too fast," she said. "That's what makes them special," Grace replied. Lucas stood beside them, feeling a pull he didn't understand. He didn't want the night to end. When Grace thanked him, her voice trembled. "You gave us more than dinner," she said. "You gave her a memory that won't fade." "I think she gave me one too," Lucas said. Lily smiled up at him. "You don't look lonely anymore." He looked at her, startled. "What makes you say that?" "Because lonely people have quiet eyes," she said simply. "Yours are noisy now." Grace laughed, softly embarrassed, but Lucas couldn't. He just nodded, speechless. As they turned to leave, Lily spun once her small boots scraping against the sidewalk. "Good night, Mr. Lucas. Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas, Lily," he said. They disappeared into the falling snow, hand in hand. Lucas watched until they vanished at the corner, his breath clouding in the cold air. He felt both lighter and heavier at once. He had spent years chasing wealth, but tonight at that small table for three, he'd glimpsed something he hadn't known he was starving for. Back inside, Antonio cleared the dishes from their table and found the napkin Lily had been drawing on earlier. A crooked little house, 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a giant sun. Across the top, she had written in careful, uneven letters, "For when we meet again." Lucas didn't see it that night, but when Antonio handed it to him the next day, it would change everything. The morning after Christmas Eve, New York looked washed out and tired, as if the city itself had stayed up too late. The snow from the night before had melted into slush, and the streets carried that quiet, hungover calm that only happens after celebration. Lucas Hale sat in his office overlooking Midtown, a place of glass chrome and unbroken order. He'd built this world to protect himself from chaos, but today it felt like a cage. His assistant knocked twice before entering her usual brisk confidence, softened by hesitation. "Mr. Hale, the meeting with Osaka's investors." "Cancel it," he said, cutting her off. She blinked. "So reschedule. Or don't. Just not today." He stared at the untouched espresso on his desk, the steam long gone then at the small folded napkin Antonio had slipped into his coat pocket that morning. Lily's drawing. A crooked little house, a smiling sun, 3 stick figures holding hands. Underneath, in uneven letters, "For when we meet again." He couldn't stop thinking about it. About Grace's voice, low and steady, about the way Lily had tilted her head when she said, "Maybe is almost a yes." It wasn't the kind of night you walked away from. It was the kind that stayed with you, rearranging things you thought were permanent. By noon, he couldn't take it any more. He put on his coat, left the building without telling anyone where he was going, and walked. Not the kind of walking people like him did to think or burn calories. This was searching, restless, driven by something he couldn't quite name. He started with Mulberry Street, the restaurant where it had begun. Antonio saw him coming and gave a knowing nod before Lucas even spoke. "They didn't come back," he said quietly. "But the way she looked at that little girl, I don't think they went far." Lucas thanked him and moved on. He stopped by the small park off Prince Street, where a few families huddled around coffee carts. No one had seen them. He checked the shelters he knew by name, the ones his foundation funded each winter. The coordinators recognized him, some smiling politely, others uneasy that a billionaire had walked through their doors unannounced. None of them had seen a mother and daughter matching Grace and Lily's description. By evening, he found himself standing at the steps of the New York Public Library. Snow flurries had started again, swirling under the marble lions. Something told him to go inside. He found them in the reading room at a long oak table near the back. Grace sat with her coat still on, reading softly from a tattered picture book. Lily's head rested on her arm, her eyes half closed. The sight hit him like a wave, so ordinary, so human, so undeservedly beautiful. Grace looked up and froze when she saw him. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice sharp with surprise and something like fear. "Neither should you," he answered quietly. She glanced down at Lily. "She likes the warmth here. We don't bother anyone." Lucas approached, slowly stopping a few feet away. "You could come with me. I can help. I meant it when I said it last night." Grace stood her chin, lifting slightly, pride returning like armor. "You were kind, but kindness has limits, Mr. Hale. I can't take charity. It isn't charity," he said, struggling to keep his tone calm. "It's a chance. A chance for her, for you." She crossed her arms, still protecting the child who was already half asleep. "And what happens when you change your mind? When people like you realize it's easier to sign a check than stay involved?" Lucas winced at the precision of her words. She was right, at least about the world he came from, but not about him, not anymore. "Then let me prove I'm not like them," he said. Grace sighed. "You don't even know us." "Maybe not," he said, "but I know what it feels like to be forgotten. I know what it's like to need something and have no one come." That made her pause. He sat down at the end of the table, lowering his voice. "Do you know why I came tonight?" Grace shook her head. "Because that question your daughter asked, do you think hunger ever ends? I haven't been able to stop hearing it. And I realized I can't live with the answer I've been giving myself." For the first time, Grace's eyes softened. She sat across from him. "You can't fix the world with one meal." "No," he said, "but maybe I can start with one table." Lily stirred, her sleepy voice cutting through the quiet. Mommy Grace leaned close. "I'm here, baby." Lily's gaze drifted toward Lucas. "You found us?" He smiled. "I told you maybe was almost a yes. The child smiled faintly and went back to sleep. For a long time, no one spoke. The great reading room was nearly empty now, the chandeliers dimming the city settling into its night rhythm. Grace watched Lucas as if trying to read his intentions. "If I say yes," she said finally, "what are you offering?" "Somewhere safe," he said. "Food, a warm bed, not forever, just until we figure things out." She looked at her sleeping daughter, her jaw tightening. "Figure things out," she repeated quietly. "That's what I tell her every day." When they left the library, snow had thickened into a soft storm. Lucas called for his driver, but Grace shook her head. "No black cars," she said. "People look at you different when you step out of one." He didn't argue. They walked. Down Fifth Avenue, past storefronts still glowing with Christmas lights, past people who didn't notice them. Grace carried Lily in her arms, and Lucas matched her pace, keeping a respectful distance. He didn't know what waited at the end of this road, but for the first time in years he wasn't thinking about the end at all. They reached a small diner, a still open light spilling onto the snow. Grace stopped. "We should go our way from here," she said. "You've done enough." Lucas started to speak, but she pressed a folded piece of paper into his hand. "Thank you," she said softly, "for reminding me that people can still care. But we need to do this on our own." He looked down. The paper was a drawing Lily's again. 3 figures standing under a cloud of snow, a sun half hidden behind them. Beneath it, the same words, "For when we meet again." By the time he looked up, they were gone. He ran out into the snow, scanning both sides of the street, calling her name, but the wind carried his voice away. Back inside the diner, the waiter asked if he wanted a seat. Lucas shook his head and left the drawing on the counter. Then he stepped back into the night, the paper's faint ink still clinging to his gloves. For the first time in his life, all his money felt useless. But that was also the moment he understood something he never had before. If miracles existed, they weren't born out of wealth or luck. They started in loss, in the moment right before too late. 3 days after Grace and Lily vanished into the snow, Lucas Hale sat in the back of his car outside his office, staring at the skyline he used to worship. For the first time in his life, success felt hollow. Every glowing tower looked like an empty promise. The world didn't need another building with his name on it. It needed something human, something that mattered. He opened his phone, found Ari's number, and called. Ari was his operations director, the man who made impossible deadlines routine. "I need to move fast," Lucas said the moment the call connected. "And this time we're not buying companies, we're feeding people." There was silence on the other end, then a cautious laugh. "Feeding people." "Yes. Every restaurant, every supplier we work with. All the excess food from tonight, tomorrow, next week, it shouldn't go to waste. I want it delivered to people who can't afford a meal. Call City Harvest. Feeding America, whoever can make it happen. I'll fund the entire thing." "Lucas, that's a huge operation. You're talking about mobilizing half of Manhattan." "I know," he said. "Let's make it bigger." By morning, his boardroom looked nothing like a place where mergers were planned. Maps covered the walls. Whiteboards overflowed with handwritten notes and routes. Logistics managers, chefs, charity organizers, and truck coordinators sat around the long oak table. Some looked skeptical, others inspired. Lucas stood at the head, his sleeves rolled up, eyes alive for the first time in years. "We're calling it Warm Tables," he said. "The goal is simple. No one in this city eats alone on Christmas week. Every restaurant that wants to help will set aside seats, meals, or leftovers. We'll deliver them to shelters, parks, anywhere people gather. No branding, no press, no names, just food and warmth." Someone from accounting raised a hand. "Sir, do you realize the cost of running this at scale?" Lucas smiled faintly. "Do you realize the cost of not doing it?" A ripple of quiet filled the room. For once, his power didn't come from authority but conviction. Within 48 hours, trucks rolled through the city bearing discreet stickers with a small emblem, a child's drawing of 3 figures beneath a shining sun. Lily's drawing. Lucas had scanned it, made it the symbol of the movement. Every driver, chef, and volunteer wore a small pin of that same design. By December 30th, New York smelled like home again. Bread stew, roasted vegetables, coffee. Restaurant owners from Brooklyn to the Bronx joined in. Some offered hot meals, others opened their dining rooms after closing hours. Lucas visited as many sites as he could, shaking hands with cooks, sitting with people who hadn't had a warm meal in weeks. He wasn't there as the billionaire philanthropist the press would later call him. He was just Lucas, a man trying to keep a promise he'd made to a 6-year-old girl with hope too big for her pockets. On the 4th day, he stood at Bethesda Terrace in Central Park, where a pop-up dining space had been set under heated tents. The air was cold, but the atmosphere hummed with life-laughter conversation, clinking cups of cocoa. Volunteers ladled soup into bowls, while musicians played quiet Christmas tunes. Lucas watched as a boy about Lily's age bit into a roll, and smiled. It was such a small thing, that smile, but it carried the weight of everything he'd been trying to fix inside himself. A woman approached from behind him, bundled in a scarf. "You're Lucas Hale, right?" she asked. "I run the East Side Shelter. We've been hearing about this all week. You've done something special here." He nodded. "It's not me," he said. "It's everyone who showed up." That night, the local news caught wind of the project, but Lucas refused interviews. When his PR team called, he told them, "If you need a name, call it a community effort. The only thing I want printed is the hotline number for anyone who needs a meal." Still, the story spread. Headlines read, "New York's Christmas Miracle Warm Tables, Fill Empty Streets." Restaurants in other states began to copy the model. Donations poured in. For the first time in a long while, hope felt contagious. But none of it mattered to Lucas until he found Grace and Lily. He'd asked volunteers to keep an eye out, but days turned into a week with no word. Then, one snowy afternoon, a young volunteer from Harlem called. "There's a mother and daughter at our pop-up kitchen near Bryant Park," she said. "They fit your description." Lucas didn't wait for his driver. He ran. By the time he arrived, his breath burned in his chest, his shoes soaked through the snow. The park glowed under strands of golden lights. People lined up for soup and coffee, laughter rising like warmth in the cold. Near the back of the tent, Grace stood ladling soup into bowls. Lily sat beside her on a crate, coloring on scrap paper. They looked different now, tired but steady. A quiet strength replacing the desperation he remembered. Lucas approached slowly. Grace turned startled at first, then stunned. "You," she said, half smiling, half in disbelief. "I told you," maybe was almost a yes, he said, breathless. Lily looked up and grinned. "You found us again. I never stopped looking," Lucas replied. Grace's eyes softened, but her voice stayed firm. "You did all this." She gestured to the bustling tents. "We did," he said. "The city did. Because of one question." "What question?" Lily asked, curious. "Yours," Lucas said quietly. "You asked if hunger ever ends. This is my answer." Grace's hand covered her mouth. For a long moment she couldn't speak. Then she whispered, "You turned one dinner into a movement." He shook his head. "You turned one question into hope." That night, Grace and Lily stayed until the last bowl was served. When the crowd thinned and the lights dimmed, Lucas handed Grace a folded envelope. "It's not charity," he said before she could protest. "It's a job offer. The Warm Tables program needs a director of outreach, someone who knows what it feels like to be on both sides of this." Grace stared at the envelope, speechless. "I don't know what to say." Say yes, Lily whispered, tugging her sleeve. Grace laughed through tears. Maybe, she said, echoing her daughter's favorite word. Lucas smiled. Maybe's good enough for tonight. Above them, snow began to fall again, soft, unhurried, endless. And for the first time, Lucas didn't just see it. He felt it. The quiet miracle of small things adding up to something that could outlast a season. The logistics of love finally working. Snow fell like grace the night everything came full circle. New York glowed under soft white light, the kind that turns even steel and glass into something gentle. Inside St. Patrick's Cathedral, the choir began their Christmas Eve hymn voices, rising toward the vaulted ceiling. The crowd was quiet, moved by something that didn't need words. Near the front sat Lucas Hale, Grace Moreno, and a little girl whose laughter once changed the course of his life. Lily stood among the children's choir, her small hands clutching a sheet of music too big for her. She looked nervous, but when she caught sight of Lucas and her mother in the pews, she smiled a brave, glowing smile and began to sing. Her voice was thin, but pure, like light breaking through frost. Grace wiped a tear from her cheek. Lucas simply sat still, feeling his chest tighten in that familiar way that wasn't pain anymore. It was gratitude. After the service, they stepped outside into the crisp air. The city hummed softly under Christmas lights. People passed by with coffee cups and wrapped gifts, unaware they were walking through the ending of a miracle. Grace linked her arm through Lucas's. Lily ran ahead, leaving tiny footprints that glistened in the lamplight. "She's happier," Grace said quietly. "She's safe," Lucas replied. "That's what matters." Grace turned to look at him. "You did that." He shook his head. "She did. You did. I just showed up." In the months since that night in Bryant Park, everything had changed, though. Not all at once. Grace had taken the job with warm tables, first hesitant, then unstoppable. She coordinated volunteers, arranged partnerships, and created something bigger than either of them had imagined. What began as a handful of restaurants had become a network, stretching across boroughs, feeding tens of thousands through winter. And Lucas, he'd changed too. His office no longer looked like a shrine to profit. The glass walls were now lined with photos, volunteers serving food, children laughing, Grace in a red scarf speaking to a crowd. He'd built companies his entire life, but this was different. This was legacy. One of Grace's ideas had taken root faster than any of them expected: the neighbor's card. Local diners kept small cards prepaid by other customers, one meal waiting for whoever needed it next. No forms, no judgment, no fanfare. Just a warm plate passed forward. Within months, coffee shops and bakeries began adopting it too. The cards spread from New York to Chicago, Boston, Seattle. Strangers feeding strangers quietly without needing to know names. It was late evening when they reached the small restaurant on Mulberry Street, the same one where it all began. The same window where a little girl had once pressed her hands and asked a question that changed everything. The same door Lucas had held open unknowingly, stepping into his own redemption. Antonio, the waiter, spotted them immediately. "Back again," he said, smiling. "I saved your table." Grace laughed. "Do you do that for everyone?" "Only the troublemakers," Antonio replied. They took their seats near the window. Outside, the city looked softer, quieter. The candlelight flickered across their faces, warm and familiar. Lily placed a folded napkin in front of Lucas, a new drawing. 3 people, 1 dog, a bright sun over a long table filled with food. "What's this one called?" Lucas asked. Lily grinned. "The table that never ends." Grace chuckled. "You've been helping her with slogans again." "Maybe she's just better at branding than I am," Lucas said. As dinner came, simple pasta, warm bread, hot cocoa for Lily. Grace looked around, realizing the restaurant was packed. Not just with diners, but with people wearing small pins, the child's drawing of 3 figures under a sun. The same logo on trucks' aprons, even city posters. Antonio leaned close and whispered, "We do warm tables here every Thursday now. It started slow. Now people line up before we open. No one eats alone anymore." Grace blinked back tears. "That's beautiful." Antonio nodded toward Lucas. "You started something good, my friend." Lucas glanced at Lily. "No," he said softly. She did. When the plates were empty and laughter had settled into comfortable quiet, Lily looked out the window. Snowflakes drifted past the glass just as they had that first night. She leaned her chin on her hand and said, "Mr. Lucas." "Yes." "Do you think hunger will ever end?" The question hung in the air, older, now heavier, with everything it had carried these past months. Grace's eyes met his. The restaurant seemed to still the clatter of dishes, the hum of voices fading into a hush. Lucas thought about the shelters he'd visited, the lines of people still waiting, the faces tired but hopeful. He thought of Grace's long hours, of Lily's laughter echoing in kitchens that used to be silent. Then he reached across the table, resting his hand gently over Lily's. "Not everywhere," he said honestly. "Not yet. But right now, for this block, for this city, it's ending a little more every day." Lily nodded, satisfied, and smiled. "Then it's working." Grace laughed softly. "She measures hope like it's math." Lucas smiled back. "Maybe she's right." Outside, carolers began singing near the corner, their harmonies floating through the cold. Lily pressed her hands to the glass again, just as she had that first night, but this time there was no hunger in her eyes, only wonder. Later, when they stepped outside, Antonio followed them with a paper bag. "Dessert for the road," he said. "On the house always." Grace thanked him, tucking it under her arm. Lily waved. "Merry Christmas." "Antonio," he grinned. "Merry Christmas, little artist." They walked toward the corner, snow swirling around them. Grace slipped her hand into Lucas's. "You know," she said, "for someone who used to eat alone, you've built a lot of tables." Lucas looked down at her, the city lights glinting in her eyes. "Guess I just needed the right company." They stopped at the same spot where they'd first met, outside that glowing window. The city pulsed softly around them, alive and forgiving. Lily twirled in the snow, her laughter echoing off the buildings. Grace leaned her head against Lucas's shoulder. For once, he didn't think about meetings, deadlines, or returns. He just watched the small footprints his family left in the snow and thought, this is what a miracle looks like. Quiet, human, made of ordinary moments that refuse to disappear. And somewhere in the night, carried on the sound of distant bells, came the echo of a child's question, "Will hunger ever end?" followed by an answer the city itself seemed to whisper back, "It already has here tonight." When the story of Lucas, Grace, and little Lily finally came full circle, it wasn't just about a billionaire who found a family or a child who found warmth. It was about something far greater, the quiet proof that a single act of compassion can outgrow its moment and ripple through the world in ways no one expects. Lucas began as a man surrounded by success but starving for meaning. Grace was a mother burdened by loss but holding on to dignity. And Lily, with her innocent question, "Will hunger ever end?" became the spark that changed everything. Their paths collided in one fleeting night outside a restaurant on Christmas Eve, but that single encounter built something much larger than a meal. It built a movement, warm tables, and a bond that turned strangers into family. Lucas discovered that real wealth isn't measured by numbers in an account, but by the lives you touch, the hearts you heal, and the tables you make room for. Grace learned that accepting help isn't weakness. It's the first step toward rebuilding. And Lily, the small girl who once dreamed of a warm dinner, became the living symbol of hope that doesn't fade even in the coldest winters. In a world that moves too fast, their story reminds us that miracles don't always appear as grand gestures or perfect endings. They begin when someone chooses to notice, to stop, to care. The question is no longer, will hunger ever end, but rather, what can I do to end it for someone today? You don't need billions to make a difference. You just need to show up with kindness, the courage to act, and the willingness to share what you have, however small. So, as you finish watching this story, take a moment to reflect. Who around you might be asking the same question Lily once did? And how can you be their answer? If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and share it with someone who believes in hope. Your support gives us the strength to keep creating stories that remind the world what humanity still looks like.